Jen Ostrich, I am so happy to have you join me on What's Possible.
Likewise. Thank you so much for having me.
For our listeners, I had the privilege of getting to know Jen when I was taking the Shift Positive 360 program. I got certified in this phenomenal tool that Jen co created, and I loved getting to hear her talk and share her coaching wisdom and experience. And so I'm thrilled to get to bring you, Jen, to our audience. And today, as our audience always knows, I let you pick the topic. So today's topic is patterns. So before we dive in and start uncovering patterns, what do you mean by patterns and why do you even like talking about them?
Yes. All right. So, in this quick little episode, we're going to dive kind of deep right off the diving board into kind of our inner makeup. So, patterns are essentially learned behaviors. They're everything from ways of being, ways of acting, ways of feeling. And they often are formed as early as, under the age of 10.
Wow.
And really, they are there to protect us. They were kinda learned behaviors that we, subconsciously learn to adapt to or create ourselves within the environment in which we were growing up. So, they have deep meaning, but that doesn't mean as an adult that they're always still serving you.
Yeah. Yeah. It is. It's as coaches, we always talk about, okay, what's that continuous narrative that you've been telling yourself all along? And does anything need any updating or, rewriting or recoding, if you will? So, as we think about patterns, why did you get so interested in patterns? And then I want to ask you, how do you use them in your coaching practice? But we're not there yet. So, what's the interest? What's the fascination?
Yeah, for sure. So, first of all, just understanding that these patterns actually happen automatically and in reaction to things, they happen faster than our intellect. So, when I came to understand that was actually when I went through a process, you're probably familiar with it, called the Hoffman process, and it's a deeply intensive week-long retreat all over the world, but in the United States, in California and Connecticut. And it was there that I came to understand that 2 things. 1, all of us have these, and so you're not alone. And 2, that we can learn to manage them as we become more aware of what role they're playing in our lives. And so what I found fascinating was, Hoffman helped us to understand that there's basically 3 ways that patterns come to be. One might be something that you observed in your early childhood and you adopted or mirrored that same pattern. So maybe you saw somebody always putting others' needs first or being helpful, and so you kind of adopted that people pleasing pattern. Another could be that you rebelled against a pattern you observed, and so you learned to do the opposite. So maybe
Mhm.
you grew up in a household with a lot of negativity or chaos, and so you became the ultra optimist or always reframing things to the positive. And the last arena is you reacted in some way, which essentially means you created a new pattern in response to what your environment was. So, an example might be maybe you didn't feel very seen or understood as a child. So, you came to rely on a lot of external validation and you grow into an adult who's a high achiever, but maybe also a little bit of a workaholic. So, that could also be where some patterns are formed.
Yeah.
So for me, I just found it so eye-opening as coaches when we work on creating sustainable change, understanding really what are those core things, the hardest aspects of ourselves that we always are going to have to learn how to manage in order to show up the way we want to be showing up. And then ultimately, yeah, how can this inform, my own work certainly and the work as that I do as a coach?
Yeah. Yeah. It's that kind of the mind and body both. There's that imprinting in our neural pathways, and then also the messages, the things we tell ourselves. So it's happening on so many levels, these
Yes.
patterns. Yeah. So when you're working with then a client, how do you use patterns in your coaching practice?
Yeah, so I think sometimes they can show up through feedback. We might learn of a behavior or even uncover an underlying belief that a client has, and then we can kind of tie back to where might that have be coming from, or where could that have been formed, and is that still serving you? Another way that I have found that's very complementary to pattern work is also with the Enneagram, and I know you've had some folks on here talking about the Enneagram. I feel like it just helps translate for you what a lot of those behaviors look like that are all rooted in some underlying motivation or pattern. And so I think for me, this might just be how my brain works, but I like to understand things. And so with clients, I like to just help them learn how to, with compassion, but to hover over some of these areas of their life and really pay
Mm.
attention to where are they showing up and when is it serving them and when is it maybe a pattern that needs to be better managed because it's no longer protecting them. They don't need it anymore.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing in that is when you're working with a client is first off helping them with some awareness that they notice the patterns, because if you don't notice something, we can't do anything about it. So as a coach, maybe seeing some themes and calling out that, hey, I wonder where this, how this is showing up in your life over time, because finding that awareness of, oh my gosh, I do that in this situation. I do it in this situation. I've done it for the last 20, 30 years or what have you. So there's that awareness. And then that question of, what do I now want to do with this? And
Yeah.
then some intentionality probably to start to rewrite
Yeah.
for, what do I want this next chapter to look like?
Yeah. And, I always say awareness is half the battle, right? We've heard that in other contexts.
Yeah.
And as you started to say, and exactly what I wanted to say here today, we cannot manage things that we cannot see. And
Yeah.
so the awareness piece is a huge part of it, and sometimes uncomfortably so because it's requiring, I might give people some homework to really study and keep a log and to kind of set a reminder 3 times a day of reflecting on how they were in meetings and making some notes. And when were some of these patterns that are the harder ones to get your arms around, how often were they showing up, and what are some alternative ways that we can be responding in those moments instead of what the pattern wants you to do.
Yeah. Well, and, just to be sensitive too, it can be hard. It can be really hard to give up these patterns because there's something that feels comfortable and safe in them.
Absolutely, and thank you for saying that. And one thing I have to credit my own coach for, she said to me, "They're not there to be gotten rid of. They're a part of you, and all of us have them,
Mhm.
and we're messy, imperfectly perfect humans,
Yeah.
right? But they are there to help show us the kinda like the goalposts, how far we've come." And
Yeah.
so it is important to have compassion when we feel like we slipped back into a pattern, but to also recognize that maybe we found it ourselves there sooner than we would have before. The fact that we even are aware that it is a pattern is again progress. And so yeah, it is hard work and they're never really gone. They're a part of us, but they're not all of
Yeah.
us. And so
Yeah.
that's an important thing to hold as your truth as well.
Yeah, and something I hear in that too is sometimes our patterns do serve us well, but they might not serve us well always.
Totally. Yes, or in every situation. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Well, and this makes me think, and our listeners have probably heard me say this many a times. And while our organization, Silicon Valley Change, is an executive coaching organization, I often cringe at the word executive coaching versus life coaching because it makes it sound like you're two different people. If you're getting life coaching, that's for the personal life. If you're getting executive coaching, it's for the work life, which is true. The topics can be quite different, but at the end of the day, we're coaching the individual. And so a pattern that has happened at home, we are fooling ourselves if we think, oh, well, I don't bring that to work. That's home. No, we're one person. And so these patterns that have developed over the years, and we did a great episode with two coaches on our team, Lisa Zagarmi and Stella Grisant,
Yeah.
on trauma and how trauma informed leadership, how you can actually use some of these imprints that we've had and use those in a way that doesn't hold you back but instead propels you forward. And I hear that in what you're talking about. These patterns, they seep into all aspects of our life. And so even though they may have originated as a protective mechanism, a coping mechanism in childhood, if they're unchecked, we might still be using them in our leadership.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's really beautifully put in terms of how we like to bucket ourselves as different types of humans, but we're really one human.
Yeah.
Agreed. And I'd say, emotional intelligence and self-awareness and self-management being 2 key aspects of that are some of the underlying themes that are almost in every coaching engagement I have, right? And
Yeah.
so I think the awareness of when these patterns are showing up, home or work, but it's like to your point, likely in both places, is so helpful. But I mean, how many people have you coached who, are struggling with boundaries or saying
Yeah.
no, or are caught up in an overachiever, or more focused on being right than effective, and
Yeah.
or worst case scenario thinking. These are all patterns, like, and we all have many of them. But
Yeah.
it's like which ones are maybe coming up over and over and kind of so on autopilot for you that it's time for you to learn, okay, let me learn when to pause this pattern and actually reconcile. I don't actually think that's what's right in this moment. And that
Yeah.
takes time to get to that point, but that's kinda like unlocking the keys to the kingdom. That's when you get to kind of manage the pattern so it's not managing you.
Yeah. Love that. All right. So as we wrap up this
Yeah.
oh so quick episode, I originally said I want you to give our listeners, one thing that they can plug and play, but I'm actually going to ask you for three things because my guess is one is hard to come up with. So, what would be your top three things if you're working with a leader who all of a sudden says, "Oh my gosh, I wasn't even aware, but you're right. There are these patterns." Or let's even take it one step before that. They're not aware of the patterns. What are some things that are really quick and easy that a leader can do immediately? So 3 tips.
Yeah. So, first, just for building that awareness, notice and name. So, you might start
Ah,
reflecting, journaling, pausing after meetings, and kind of taking a quick note on how you were showing up. But notice what things seem to happen automatically, even when you're not intending them to. And that might
mhm,
be the start of opening your eyes up to a pattern. Or
yeah,
notice if there's certain people who are always pushing your buttons, or what is it about that dynamic, or what's coming up for you inside of that relationship. Another area to notice and name is emotional reactivity. You wouldn't have thought you would have had an emotional reaction in whatever way, but you did. And so I like to say create a log and really, it's tempting to say only 2 weeks, but if you could do 4, I think that's ideal. So for a month, say, I'm really gonna watch and pay attention. If I don't feel like I have any awareness, make notes on anything that you're noticing that's automatic. If you're starting to dial into a couple things that have been ever present for you, start noticing more detail around them. When are they happening? What's true for you? Who was it with? What certain situations? That sort of thing. And then when you get to the point where you're aware of it and you can kind of catch yourself in the moment, that's when it's the invitation. And the third thing I'll offer is just try something different.
uh,
Whatever it is, and it's hard to say what that suggestion could be because it could be
sure.
different for every pattern. But just say to yourself, "I know I normally do this, and I'm going to try this." And then just start to study those results. What happens when you pivot or have a different response than you normally do? You might get a different response from the person you're normally butting heads with. Who knows?
Yeah. Oh, 3 really, really practical steps. And I also wanna do certainly, plug for whether it can be a therapist, a coach, but working with someone who isn't in your inner circle, but somebody outside who can be an objective thought partner, an objective person to help you identify some of these
Yeah.
patterns can also be immensely helpful.
Yeah, for sure.
Jen Ostrich, thank you for joining me on What's Possible in the Moment.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been great to see you.